You can get a telephoto zoom lens just like this for as little as $30. Is it any good? Can it keep up with today's modern technology? How about we find out? You may remember a few months ago I mentioned my pep unearthed his old Nikon FE and a couple of old Nikon lenses that he let me borrow. I used the 50mm a couple times, but I haven't really experimented with this weird ass lens. It's an 85-205 f3.8. Quite ass weird indeed. I got curious and I looked around to see how much it'd cost to buy this lens in our future world. So interestingly enough, when looking for this lens on the used market, I actually could not find this exact one anywhere. I found some similar Vivitar lenses for around $30 or less, or maybe a little bit more in some cases, and they look extremely similar. But as I look at this lens, it's actually called a Telesor MC Auto zoom. I guess Telesor is a company, I've never heard of them. But looking for any other Telesor lenses, I really couldn't find much. The ones I did find were right around the same price as these Vivitar lenses, so I'm not sure if it's maybe the same lens branded differently or slightly different models, or if this one is just rare. But it's not like this lens is of super exceptional quality or anything, so I'd imagine if you bought one of these Vivitar lenses, you would probably walk away with a similar experience to this one. I shot some test images, and I took it out into the city to see how it performs with real photos. But first, let's see how it works for video. You're actually watching me through it right now. It obviously doesn't have autofocus, and it's a pretty long lens, so I can't really guarantee that I'm in focus right now. That means I'm basically a scientist. My hypothesis is to be tested quantum singularity modular synthetic biology computer. I want to see if I could realistically use this as a long telephoto lens, or if I'm going to be constantly disappointed with its sharpness and contrast. Don't cry at me that optical perfection isn't everything. I know, and I agree. Maybe I'll sell my car and buy a fucking horse too. I like sharp photos, and sharp lenses inspire me to shoot more. You don't like it? Then litigate. Nah, I'm just kidding. But seriously, I hate soft lenses. Nah, I'm joking around. But I'm serious. I've got it on the A7 IV at 85mm next to my Sigma 85mm on the A7 III. They both currently stop down to f5.6 to make it a little more even. How do they compare? Why don't we open up the apertures and you'll see why it's not even close. First of because the Sigma is an f1.4 and the Nikon is an f3.8. And wide open, the Sigma performs more like alien technology than a lens, versus the more dirty Tupperware look of the Nikon. For stills, I'm going to test its sharpness at various focal lengths and apertures. Since it's a weird-ass 85-205, it'll go up against my Tamron 150-500 at 200mm, my Laowa 100mm, and probably the sharpest lens I own, the Sigma 85mm. So let's not wait, let's spank into these sample photos. Each focal length will have a shot at each of the marked apertures on the lens, f3.8, 5.6, 8, 11, 16, and f22. Then the closest I can get to those apertures on the modern lenses. We'll start on the short end at 85mm. Now we all know pretty much no lens performs its best wide open, but I did think it was interesting just how quickly this lens cleaned up by just dropping it down to f5.6, which is its next available aperture. And then I think by the time it gets to f8, it's probably its sharpest point. Now, I'm not trying to shit on old lenses or anything, but I do find this sort of thing interesting, and I did find that the Sigma wide open at f1.4 was actually sharper than this old Nikon lens at its sharpest f8 aperture. I just think it's really cool just how far lenses have come. But always be reminded, your smartphone lens still sucks ass. For the other two lenses, we'll just go ahead and fly through them. I wanted to start with the 85 because I thought it was the most stark difference. haven't really owned vintage lenses before, so I'm not sure how normal it is, but this thing wide open at any focal length is insane. It's kind of cool looking, but it also looks like it has a saran wrap front element. But as we stop down, it's pretty damn good. Even the Tamron suffers from some pretty rough chromatic aberration at most apertures. People in glass houses can't commit arson for insurance payouts. For the last part of this video, I took it out around sunrise for a short POV shoot. I think most of the images are trash, but that's not necessarily the lens's fault. If there's one thing I've learned in the past couple of years, it's that the part of my brain responsible for manually focusing lenses is badly damaged. Not to mention I'm severely out of practice for telephoto street and honestly street in general, as I have a hard time being inspired when it's been roughly the same temperature as the surface of the sun in recent months. Alright, so this wasn't a particularly long POV shoot. I just really wanted to get out and just see how it performed with real subjects and not just a bottle of alcohol, with straight lines and sunshine and deep contrast that you can only really get out in the real world. Same with the video. I went ahead and I just left all these photos unedited. They're basically raw files, just re-exported as JPEGs. I didn't even crop or straighten anything. This is exactly how they came out of my camera as the raw file. So I just really wanted to show you guys exactly what this lens produces and the kind of files that you would be editing if you bought something like this. Most of these are between f5.6 and f8, obviously, because they're nice and sharp, or sharp enough at least, and there's no crazy chromatic aberration or anything, with the exception of a few towards the end. Here in a few minutes, you'll see just how terrible this lens can look if you don't shoot it at its sharpest apertures. Okay, so here's where things start to fall apart just a little bit. I decided to open it wide open to get these little Christmas lights in the foreground, and honestly the bokeh looks pretty nice, but of course everything else is very soft. It is incredibly hard to get focus just right at such a long focal length. I think I was zoomed all the way out at 205 millimeters, and the chromatic aberration in some of these is just absolutely brutal. I mean, the photo has got to be at least 40 to 50% purple in some of these. This one in particular, I think it's because he had a white hat against a pretty dark background, so that contrast just really wreaked havoc on this lens. Maybe some people like this look. I mean, I don't. I think there's a reason that lens manufacturers try to eliminate this as much as possible. If you want to add fake chromatic aberration, that's honestly probably easier than getting rid of some of this really thick chromatic aberration, especially the longitudinal stuff that we see oftentimes when you're shooting wide open like this. All in all, I do think this lens could be of some use to somebody. It's got a good focal range and a fairly fast aperture, though I'd strongly recommend against shooting it wide open. The main problem I have, well, there are two, is the sheer number of control rings on it. There are 4, and they all have the same texture. So when you're shooting, it's incredibly difficult to tell the right one. I found myself often changing focus when I meant to zoom or vice versa. Not to mention there's actually 2 focus rings, one for macro and one for telephoto, which adds to the confusion. So I'd say shooting it handheld when critical focus matters is probably not a good idea. The other problem with it is that it's quite long and heavy and there's no collar. So you're putting a lot of pressure on your tripod plate. But otherwise, it gave me some decently sharp images. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to see a time where I used a lens that's not this one, click right here. I tricked you this time. Foiled again. Thanks for watching. Subscribe.